So in the next hour, hopefully I'll be able to share with you how in my practice I integrate the very traditional Ayurvedic concepts from the classics to that of my practice in London. So the topic I have chosen is intermittent fasting and physical activity or exercise. In other words, in the context of Langhana as a method of detoxification approach by Ayurvedic practice in the West. So I'd like to give you a brief context as to why it was so necessary for me to think in Ayurveda, to think in Sanskrit, which is what brought me to Ayurveda because of my early education in Sanskrit, made me a great lover of all Indian systems of science. But then I practice in a very strange place, and the culture is completely different, the context is very different. You know, I don't practice in a teaching hospital. I am not a teacher of Ayurveda, particularly for my patients. And so to integrate what I deeply have imbibed through my Ayurvedic knowledge to my modern practice can sometimes be quite adventurous, which I think is what is also keeping me very happy to explore the traditions of Ayurveda. So this is our clinic in London. It's right in the middle of London in Marylebone. And as you can see, our clinic is not famous because of me. It's famous because of Beatles. So yeah, Paul McCartney, he lived in the clinic where I practice, and he literally composed several songs. So we have these tourist guides who stand outside of my clinic window and in very strong British accent explaining the history of Beatles. And sometimes my patients ask me, what's happening? And it once so happened that some of my relatives, they wanted to visit my clinic, and then they all followed me, and then the receptionist called me back and said, please be aware, tourists have a tendency just to walk into this building. Don't let them in. But that's just a side story. But what I like to say is, you see, the British culture is very different from any of the other cultures that I have been exposed to, even within English-speaking countries. So often, you would have to really translate the classics of Ayurveda for your patients in a time that is available for you for about 1 hour or 1.5 hours to get them to understand the Ayurvedic concepts and to follow. So that's exactly what I will be sharing with you today in the context of Langhana. For myself, you know, having lived not in India for a very long time, the very concept of undergoing panchakarma or even seasonal shodhana 3 times a year, or not all the time is possible for practical reasons. And then you would kind of think of, okay, where would you go back if you really want to apply authentic Ayurveda to help yourself or your patients? Then I went back to the classics where chikitsa or treatment is seen as 6 different upakramas or 6 different therapeutic approaches, which forms the umbrella of the whole of Ayurvedic therapeutics. So one of which really drew my attention for many practical reasons is Langhana. I'll tell you why. One of the, as Dr. Ram Manohar rightly mentioned, the problem is not so much of toxins or our effort to detoxify, but what I've noticed in my practice and in my life is because we are constantly surrounded by food, both mentally and literally, we overeat. And even when we are fasting, our mind is thinking about the next food that we can eat, only because it is right there, either in your fridge or in a fantastic cafe or a restaurant just few meters away from you. So our life, in a way, is constantly filled with the thought of eating. But if you look at human evolution, I think humans did not have this ability or this possibility to think that I can eat food anytime I want. Evolution-wise, you never knew. You could have had food today, but you might have had to go without food for a very long time if you think about human evolution. But that kind of wiring of our brain has completely changed today after evolution, because now we are constantly surrounded by food. So if I want to kind of translate the Ayurvedic classical aspects of adhyasana, which is excessive eating, and adhyasana, probably even if it is not happening literally, it happens in our mind. And one of the things that I also know through various blood tests that I run in my practice is that if you are constantly thinking about food, and if you don't develop a discipline of depriving yourself of the opportunity to dig into the next plate of food, the biomarkers completely change. And I've seen that in several of my patients. So in a way, today, if you are thinking about proper ways of eating, not indulging in adhyasana, which is excessive eating, or anashana, which is not eating, which is also not what we should be doing, because I do see a lot of problems in terms of eating disorders within my practice, because either we are thinking about eating or we are thinking about avoiding eating. And there's adhyasana or anashana, and surely adhyasana or anashana is not just the mechanical act of eating, because you have to think about it and take a decision. So with most of the eating problems that I may have, you may have, or your patients may have, it starts with our mind. So we have to get the concept of this Langhana as an effective upakrama, or therapeutics, within our lifestyle interventions. And that's what led me to actually use these major aspects of Brahmana or Apatarpana, either depleting the body of excessive nourishment or nourishing the body, which is Santarpana, became the key clinical guidelines for my practice. If you look at Langhana from its derivation, so it's Laghi, Lit, which is the pratyaya. Langhana is a term which is an akaranta napumsakalinga. It's derived from the root laghi with a pratyaya lit. This means to pass over means abstain from food or fasting. And I guess it's important to understand that Langhana is not just one thing. I mean, literally how I understood Langhana when I was learning Sanskrit before Ayurveda is Langhana is to jump. Like literally when my Sanskrit teacher was teaching Langhana, not as an Ayurvedic scholar, I would be thinking of a monkey, because I could relate to monkeys better. It's like literally jumping or skipping. So if you think of Langhana as an act of skipping, when you have the choice to actually indulge, would already be, for me, a way of introducing Langhana as a way to actually correct your agni, to correct your metabolism. And upakrama, application. So upakrama is again a akaranta pulinga shabda with kramu as a dhatu, with upasarga, upa and gai, pratyaya, which means anything leading to a result. Treatment, practice, or application of medicine to treat or attend on. So when you think of the word upakrama, it is a major therapeutic application. So Langhana as a key therapeutic application. Because when we study Dravya Guna of herbs, we do look at the gunas like Lagu, Guru, and then how do you bring about Lagutva or lightness? You would have to think about Langhana. So many times in clinical practice, to translate these very core concepts of guna to therapeutic application, you would have to go back to Sanskrit. Where does the root come from, and what was it originally in the minds of acharyas when they thought about it? Because I must say, like in one of the conversations recently, Ayurveda was, of course, was for everyone, but even within countries like India, not everybody could have afforded Ayurveda all the time, even historically. It was largely meant for the royals, it was largely meant for the warriors or the more, upper affordable classes, whereas those who didn't have time or couldn't afford would still have had to resort to the methods of Ayurveda in a way that they were able to. And that's why if you go back to Ayurveda's basics of Shadupakramas, Rukshana, Snehana, Langhana, and Brahmana, Stambhana, these actually can help us a lot in formulating our own lifestyle interventions. The definition of Langhana is that Yat Kinchit Lagavakaram Dehe Tat Langhanam Smritam Langhanam Lagavaya Yat. So anything that brings about the quality of lightness, lagutha, in the body, and when I say body, from an Ayurvedic perspective, body and mind are the same, or they're interchangeable, is Langhana. So how can you bring about lightness? Would be the ultimate outcome of whether you have performed Langhana in a correct way. I'm going to look at how you can actually, like with Panchakarma, you can actually create Vyapat or iatrogenic diseases due to improper application, when Langhana becomes starvation, or when Langhana or fasting becomes an obsession. That's the point where you or me as clinicians would have to assess whether we are actually going into Rukshana, into depletion, as opposed to using Langhana as an effective method to correct the agni. So the synonyms of Langhana in classics is Apatarpana. So Apatarpana in the context of Dvivida Upakrama, the two Upakramas, major therapeutic applications, there are two types. The word Langhana and Apatarpana are used synonymously in Ashtanga Hridaya. So Apatarpana, so if we kind of look at the word Samtarpana, Sam, like Sanskrit, or anything that starts in Sam in Sanskrit is very well, Samskrita is very well done. So that's why it's Samskrita. And Samskara again is, similar. And Santarpana is overall having that tarpana or nourishing effect. Almost like you could use it as a synonym with rasayana. But as we know, for rasayana to occur, there must be a preparatory process, much like you can't fill into a dirty cup. You would have to empty the cup. So before rasayana, there would have to be the preparatory process which forms the purva karma, dipana and pachana. But if you translate that into, how can you, when you don't have the facilities for panchakarma, like I don't in my clinic in central London, although we do it elsewhere, is to go back to Langhana as a way, when you are using shamana or rasayana as a chikitsa, best actually to use, to interlude that with Langhana, or to prepare the person with Langhana. And hopefully I'm going to be able to show you later how I'm going to be using, how I actually apply Langhana practically. Yeah? Once I've gone through the theoretical background in classics. The indications for Langhana See, Langhana, if you really look at it as Dvividopakrama, Santarpana and Apatarpana, and even bring it that back to Panchakama Shodhana, where there is high armor, that's where Shodhana is the right approach. But when there is moderate armor, you would go for Pachana and Dipana. And Upavasa, which is literally fasting, Trishna Nigraha, which is basically reducing the amount of liquids that a person takes. I would have to say this is one area that I haven't really understood very well, because in my application of Langhana, I allow my patients, I encourage my patients to have lots of water, lots of warm water. And then Vyayama, which is exercise, and Atapa Maruta Seva, which is very interesting. Like when Vagbhata explains Niragni, or the Dipana and Pachana that you can do without stimulating the Agni through herbs or spices or phytomedicine. The methods that both Charaka and Vagbhata they look at is, one of it is really Maruta Tapasevana, is to be outdoors, to be in the sun, to do something outdoors. And I tell you, for me, I go to British Military Fitness, and it's really outdoors. It's fantastic. And then for 1 hour, you actually are not given much water either. You're only given very little water if you complete half of all the challenging tasks, and it's with people. We actually now have sunshine for the last 2 years in England. Just in case you're thinking, no, Britain is all great. It isn't. But I'll tell you, I'll give you a research perspective on why it is very important to exercise outdoors. And I also would like to pose a controversial question, which is, Vyayama in Ayurveda is not the same as yoga. Because when I ask some of my colleagues and patients, they say, well, I do yoga, but in my view, yoga was never meant as a physical exercise. Yoga was preparation of the body for a spiritual experience, but making yoga itself an exercise may not have the holistic benefits that Ayurvedic classics recommend. And therefore, I personally strongly recommend that to be a good Ayurvedic follower, one would have to be exercising outdoors and take up Vyayama as an important lifestyle intervention. And there are many references in the classics as to what are the benefits of Vyayama. Then let's look at the types of Langhana. So there is Shodhana, which is the whole package, like the whole shebang from Purva Karma, Pradhana Karma to Paschat Karma, and all of the appropriate panchakarmas for any given person. Then Pachana and Dipana, and there's pharmacotherapy. So either one can choose herbs which have lagu and gunas which have ruksha gunas, which have ushna gunas that can bring about laguta, or the whole of Shodhana, or Pachana and Dipana. Then there's another which is Upavasa and Trishna Nigraha, which is through dietary management. And Vyayama or Atapa Maruta Seva, which is through exercise and lifestyle management. So it's important, for us to kind of understand that Ayurvedic classics never actually laid out the exact steps of how to do many of the procedures that we are following today, including Abhyanga, but highlighted the key concepts, the key principles that would need to be incorporated when you are applying it. And when you think about it, you can bring about Langhana either through Shodhana or through dietary management or through exercise and lifestyle management. Obviously, It depends on the kind of person for whom you are suggesting this, which I'll go into what the classics say. So one could do, I mean, the examples for before, one could do fasting, which is a way of Langhana. And what is Langhana Pachana? You're doing Langhana, at the same time you're doing Ama Pachana. Because you must kind of think, even in your clinical practice or for yourself, you may not have signs of Ama. Their fasting is good enough. But you may have signs of Ama, then Langhana Pachana would be good, where you could do fasting plus, I've just given the example of Trikatu, which is very easy in practice to use. And Dosha Sechana, which is getting rid of the excess dosha, that would be through Virechana. So these are the examples of how in the classics Langhana is suggested. And let's look at what classics say about indications of Langhana. Where should you do Langhana? For me, like when patients come to me, they all kind of say, Vijay, can you do detoxification? That's the concept they have. But if you ask them why, and you ask some of them, they say, I've just been to Mayo Clinic and I've spent 3 weeks there, and 4 weeks before that they were in Turkey at a fasting retreat, and now they want to do something Ayurvedic with me because they are like the serial killers. They are serially doing these various avatarpana procedures. But then, for you will have to really think about, as a clinician, just because your patient is asking, can you take me through Shodhana? Can you do something? You would have to be very clear as to what are the true indications. And that's where classics help me a lot. And when I go back to the classics, Ashtanga Hridaya, indications for Langhana, one of the major things for many of my patients is about maintaining their weight or weight loss, or it is about not aging. I'm talking their perspective. That's the outcomes that they are interested in. But then, where actually should you use Langhana? Classics say Tvak dosha. So skin conditions, chronic skin conditions. And I tell you, it doesn't even have to be chronic skin conditions. I've noticed when you have blemishes, or sometimes you wake up in the morning and you can't recognize yourself in the mirror. And you think, what's happened to my skin? If this happens repeatedly, then I would say, oh, maybe, actually, you would need to work on your Tvak, because Tvak is an important indication of your rasa and rakta, which are the initial indicators of how our dhatus are working. So skin is very important. And like even in Panchakarma, when you see when someone has undergone good Panchakarma, one of the key things you look at is whether there is clarity in the complexion. So, because Ayurveda classics really emphasized on clinical assessments, it's very important to be attuned to understanding the quality of your skin and what's happening to your skin or to your patients. So when there's Tvak dosha, excess of snigdha, so which is excess of sneha qualities, and I tell you, excess of snigdha can be either because of excessive snehana, or probably, if you have had a fantastic holiday somewhere in Germany for 2 weeks, it is very unlikely if you're not to be excessively snigdha because of all the amazing cakes which are so creamy, and all the amazing, bechamel sauce which is all very creamy, and like the amounts of fats that we actually eat today is something perhaps even 1,000 years ago people couldn't have afforded so much of fat that even somebody who's very poor can today eat. I mean, forget the bad quality of fats, but the very fact that we can afford fat, and everything has so much fat. And so Ati Snigdha would be one of that. And then Abhishandi Gunas. I'm going to go through the various foods that I think, in a modern perspective, that causes Abhishandi. Abhishyandi is one which clogs the Shrotasis. And in fact, the very Ayurvedic pathophysiology talks about the main cause within the mechanism, not vidana, mechanism or some property of any disease is blockage or abhishyandi. So the main thing that we are trying to promote through an Ayurvedic healing or in Ayurvedic diagnosis is to understand why there is a blockage of Sangha and where is that blockage coming from. And the moment there is a blockage, every other process will result in the formation of disease. So it's important to avoid things that cause abhishyandana or that makes the body vulnerable to blockages. And I'll look at what those foods I think could be contributing. And Ati Brumhita person, so overnourished. I mean, literally, I would say that a lot of us today are Ati Brumhita, I mean, when we really particularly look at our biomarkers, if you are moving away from the very kind of broad markers like the body mass index or the weight and the fat to muscle mass percentage, if you move away from that and if you literally measure the biomarkers, a lot of us actually show nourishment which is more than necessary for our body to be functioning well. So we could assume that a lot of people that we are today, particularly in our environment, could be Ati Brumhita. But the problem is Ati Brumhita with a lot of stress, which is a completely opposing factor that makes things worse. Then in Shishira, which is autumn, which is like now, and Hemanta in winter. So Ayurveda suggests that in autumn and in winter are absolutely essential for us to be undergoing Langhana, whichever the form that we just looked at. Meha, which I'm sure a lot of people have come across, that Sushruta in fact says that if somebody is diagnosed with Madhumeha, which is the 20th or the 4th type of Vataja Prameha, which today we compare it with type 2 diabetes, probably we shouldn't be comparing it with type 2 diabetes at all, because the way the understanding of diabetes has completely changed now. But anyway, if you are considering Meha or metabolic syndrome, which leads to the complications of metabolic syndrome, and if you think of Meha, Sushruta, what he says is, if somebody is throwing sweet urine from their system, then one of the best ways to address that is make this person dig a well. It's amazing what Sushruta is very drastic. He says that ask this person to go by himself, don't provide any helpers, and to dig a well. So you can imagine the physical intensity with which one would have to work to dig a well when they have Meha. So physical intervention is seen as a very important aspect of treatment in Ayurveda. It's only that the post-colonial, the Raj mentality of Ayurveda, which has made a lot of Ayurvedic thinkers to think that Ayurveda, we don't need to look at physical activity. That's a completely separate thing. Because people in the past were very tough. They had to be physically active to actually get by their every day. And it's an important intervention. And Ama dosha, which we all know, and also in acute jwara, which completely makes sense, is fever. So when there is acute fever, when there is more ama, then that you actually want to let the body itself get rid of the ama without actually overfeeding it. So obviously in acute fever.
May I ask a short question?
Should be.
When you're talking about biomarkers, are you talking about triglycerides and cholesterol, or more specific one like inflammation?
I mean, definitely triglycerides, yeah. And also all the whole of the lipid profile. But even if you look at the liver function test, And on top of it, if you look at C-reactive protein, and a lot of them will have high C-reactive protein, even if their lipid profile is perfectly fine. And you follow them longitudinally, actually, if you introduce intermittent fasting, their C-reactive protein will come down. And interestingly, the high-density lipoprotein will go up, and then the balance between the HDL and LDL becomes normalized. And that's the beautiful aspect of simple interventions like fasting. According to Sushruta, individuals who are overweight must do Langhana on a daily basis. So this is a very interesting thing that Sushruta talks about. Like if there is excess weight, then they should be doing Langhana on a daily basis. This is what leads to how I apply Langhana in my practice, is to look at intermittent fasting. There are many different ways of intermittent fasting. You could do 16-8. One of the things that I think, which it took a long time for me to realize, is that breakfast is not a necessary meal. And when I compare why breakfast is not a necessary meal, more than any of the scholars, I really had to look back at my parents. My parents are not Ayurvedic practitioners, but they practice Ayurveda as part of their culture. And when I look at my mom's and dad's routine in India, they wake up in Brahmi Muhurta at 4:30 or 5, no matter, even if we have traveled and come back from some place at 11 or 12 in the night, they always wake up at the same time. And then I keep watching them while I'm still trying to get up. What do they do? Are they going to quickly prepare breakfast or coffee? What do they do? But they do all the rituals. They do their cleaning, they do their abhyanga, they do their puja, they do all the rituals. And I ask my parents when I'm in India, why about breakfast? Oh, well, it's going to take this much long for me to do my rituals, and by the time that they are ready for breakfast, it's not breakfast time, and they have their lunch. But when that becomes their lifestyle, I have seen how well they are even at their advanced ages. And so, Langhana on a daily basis is perhaps the classical indication given in Sushruta, which perhaps gives people like me and you to use the concept of intermittent fasting. And so the main things that I will kind of look at is, with my patients, do I have a tendency for apple-shaped obesity or pear-shaped obesity? And what I find is those who have apple-shaped obesity tend to have more of increased biomarkers, or inflammatory biomarkers, and tend to be having more of this Vidahi, Pitta qualities. And those who have more pear-shaped, they tend to be having more of the Kapha qualities, or sometimes even the Vata qualities. So it's important actually to decide where the weight is going. And for me, clearly, in my practice, if I see this process happening, that's an indication for me that I really need to address ama on an everyday basis. Because it's the visceral fat which in my practice I have noticed has the highest kind of contributing cause for chronic illnesses or poor management of chronic illnesses than those who actually have pear-shaped adiposity. So a clear distinction that one would have to make outside of Prakriti to understand the Vikriti. And what does intermittent fasting, particularly do? Why do we have to do that? This is now coming back to my patient's language, where I can't explain to them. So Shruta has asked you to do Langhana on a daily basis, because that would take several months for me to explain to them, is really to get to understand this concept of leptin resistance. What I have known is that even through case studies, that even before somebody becomes diabetic, particularly type 2 diabetes, there is insulin resistance. But interestingly, insulin resistance cannot easily be measured just by measuring fasting insulin in our clinical practice. The fasting insulin could be quite normal, but still they may have insulin resistance. And what I do is I like to look at perhaps they have leptin resistance, which develops even, let's say, 10 years before they develop insulin resistance, and which can be measured through reverse T3. If reverse T3 is higher, there's a clear indication that there's leptin resistance. And understanding leptin perhaps helps my patients and also me to kind of look at why Langhana or fasting is helpful. It's like leptin is released by the fat tissue, and the leptin sends a message to the brain, and when I'm hungry, the brain obviously sends the message, and then I start eating. And when I'm full, leptin would have to indicate to the brain that you are full and stop eating. But those individuals who have leptin resistance, they won't get that message, so they continue to eat. And this is one of the things that I have noticed in many of us, is that there is leptin resistance, not necessarily our emotional overeating, but there is also a biochemical imbalance that leads to our habit of overeating. And the other thing that I noticed when I start doing Langhana or intermittent fasting for my patients is they do it, and straight after they break their fast, that day they're extremely hungry. And that also to me indicates that there is an Agni imbalance. But if they continue to do that for several weeks, you see that that phenomenon will have changed. So there are many different ways how you can see if your patient's Tikshna Agni or Vishamagni is coming into Samahagni when you use Langhana or intermittent fasting. I pay a lot of attention, when it comes to Langhana or fasting, and I compare it with how traditional Ayurvedic Ayurvedas would have embraced the concept of Langhana to how we can understand it. See, for my parents, they don't need any explanation on leptin. They won't even understand it. Or they wouldn't even want to know which are the neurotransmitters that make them happy. They're actually happy. It's the unhappy people like me who like to understand. Why am I unhappy? I'm having everything I want, but why am I unhappy? And many of my patients are also very similar to like that. So, see, for my parents, doing Langhana as Ekadashi, which is the 11th day of the lunar cycle, has been a practice since their childhood. And that's what is their best health insurance, I would say. It's because they have done it for 60 years or more, and that's keeping their metabolism and their Agni well, and then Ama at a lower level. And also, when they're not doing their Ekadashi, Langhana, they don't overeat. I come to Birstein, and actually I always overeat because I feel maybe I won't get this food next. After these 2 days and going back to London, I might not actually have this. Let me fill myself up. But this comes from our attitude. And attitude is a very important aspect that leads to whether we can implement Langhana or intermittent fasting or not. And of course, I do explain to my patients that the most important things to understand are serotonin, which is the happy hormone, and 80 to 90% of is made in gut. Like when we go back to the Ayurvedic understanding that any good Vaidya would start and stop at correcting the Agni. It is about, Roga Sarveti Jayante Mandagunam Sutara Mudananicha. So it is about understanding Agni, it is about gut health, because that's what ultimately the reality is. And then what happens with many of my patients, I'm explaining what happens is they may have all the potential to be happy because they're happy people or they have enough serotonin, but often they would not have what converts the precursor to serotonin, which is the 5-HTP, 5-hydroxytryptophan, which usually is triggered along with sufficient amounts of activated vitamin B6. And then this generally is because they're not sleeping well. One of the key things that I see is when their sleep is disturbed, the absorption of vitamins and minerals or nutrients, or if you think about the quality of the ahara rasa, is affected, because when there is no good sleep, there is no way how your body can be producing the right biochemicals which would lead to what we want here as serotonin. And the other thing is, because we spend so much time in dark and in artificial light and in not natural light, that it reduces the ability for our body to be producing serotonin, and that's another problem. So sleep and poor sleep and overeating seems to be two key important contributing factors that's leading to imbalances in Agni and in chronic illnesses. Obviously, the way I explain to my patients is that, like in Ayurveda, the connection between your prana and apana is extremely important. The main thing is to keep your entire body open so that the energy or prana can flow through your entire body without any sangha or obstruction. But when there is obstruction to the apana, of course there is a dysfunction between the prana and the apana. And if you literally translate this, in my clinical practice, I would think my patients, sometimes including me, like we have got two problems. One is we don't have enough ability to produce serotonin, and our melatonin is low. So, it is the cortisols that will be very high because of poor sleep and stress, which contributes to a very strong vata disturbance and pitta disturbance, resulting in both neuroinflammation as well as hormonal disruption, which is how I see the disturbance in vata and pitta contributing ultimately to affecting the rasa, or the quality of rasa.
The slide before. I don't understand this. Stimulate this 5-HTP and
5P. P5P is pyridoxine 5-phosphate, which is vitamin B6, activated form of vitamin B6. And it's known that the combination of P5P and 5-HTP, for instance, Brahmi has a very high, this is, if you're looking at phytomedicine, those who actually have good amounts of vitamin B, which is only possible if they have good bacterial flora, because most of vitamin B is only because of bacteria. It is produced by bacteria. So those who have versatile bacterial flora, good gut, good acne, are the ones who can actually absorb. So it's also for me, from an Ayurvedic perspective, if I'm giving my patients medias like Brahmi, to get the advantage of 5-HTP, their vitamin B complex has to be good, which comes from their bacterial flora. So obviously, for my patients, I'm going to explain to them the difference between good fat and bad fat, because this also for me as an Ayurvedic student helps me. Because necessarily, fat or maida is not necessarily a mala. Maida actually is very important because maida is the one which protects, it lubricates. It actually, kapha, which is so closely linked to maida, is a balasa, the one which gives you the immunity. Then we would need to understand the difference between bad fat and good fat, which is a huge misconception because we think all fat is bad. Not just food-wise, even bodily-wise. We have this conception that all fat is bad. And when I really look at that, the good fat, which is the subcutaneous fat, which is what Ayurveda says, is, if you're well padded, like a kapha person, kapha people are very nice to sit by their side because they're so cuddly. Except on an economy class flights. Kapha people are the fantastic company you can have, as opposed to these nervous vatas and aggressive pittas. But this kapha, they have this amazing distribution of subcutaneous fat, like babies, and this is the most important thing. Not all fats are the same, because we have white fat and we have brown fat. Now I'm not being racist here, literally. Actually, the white fat is the one which stores energy, and brown fat is like your baby bacon. Like we call it baby bacon in Britain, like these little cute infants, babies. They are very cute, and as they grow up, they completely lose all their fat and they become quite well defined. That's because the brown fat itself has the ability to burn energy. And this is important that when probably, I think, when Sushruta and Bhagavata were describing the quality of Kapha Prakriti, they really were referring to the amount of brown fat that a Kapha person would have, and that would give them, that would be like the log which gives the fuel for burning for longer. So for me, understanding Kapha from a more modern perspective, I had to negotiate that debate, because I myself would think that, okay, actually all fat is bad. No, not all fat is bad. If my tummy is becoming bigger and my arms and legs are looking skinny, that's when I need to worry. But if my arms and legs are becoming nicely well padded, good subcutaneous, then that I'm moving more towards kapha, not towards a stage of ama. And the fat obviously is the visceral fat, which produces cytokines that trigger low-level inflammation. So one of the things that we really look at is staurya in Ayurveda is considered as one of the unwanted conditions to have. It is ashtaunindita. I mean, not just at this stula person by genetics, but even staurya as a condition is considered, dushtasadhya, or sometimes even kashtasadhya or asadhya, difficult to manage. And that, when you really translate that into our current day situation, that's because most of the conditions that we today, as we understand, like dementia, asthma, breast cancer, colorectal cancer, and cardiovascular diseases, they all are very directly linked to someone's excessive bad fat or visceral fat. So Langhana would be a very important intervention in our clinical practice. And then the other thing I also want to stress upon is, when it comes to fat, it is not just the fat that we are looking at around the viscera or overall, but it's the intramuscular fat. This is the problem, like intramuscular fat. I'm sure, if you buy, I don't know how many of you have observed, if you buy meat from a non-organic or a cheaper version, what you see is really lots of this marbling effect between the fibers of flesh. And if you buy a grass-fed organic meat, or if someone buys, when you look at it, you see that there is not that marbling effect. The main difference is when someone has had a good lifestyle, like being in the sun, having good food, the marbling effect in the muscle tissue won't take place. And there are lots of research which shows that, in fact, it is not the rice, it is not the wheat, it is that is predisposing to diabetes in several countries, including India, but it is the excessive amount of intramuscular fat due to poor nutrition. So obviously lack of light and poor nutrition leads to poor formation of mamsa dhatu, because one of the key things with Meda, it's protective, but it also helps in good formation of mamsa dhatu. You don't have to be having a muscly bodybuilder build, but to have good quality of mamsa, you need to have a good interaction between the Meda and mamsa. And I'll have to quickly go through these to get to the practical aspects. Vata metabolic type, I'm sure most of you will know. You can recognize this through what I have started to do is, besides understanding their prakriti or their vikriti, I try to understand their Agni more as an imbalance in their metabolic type from a Vata Pitta Kapha perspective. And I would say these are some of, Vata, when there is a Vata imbalance, I see cravings as one of the important features. And then they, a tendency towards anxiety, disturbed sleep, and constipation. And with Pitta, food allergies, particularly food intolerances are very common amongst those who have a Pitta type imbalance. But interestingly, also with Pitta metabolic types, what I've noticed is they put on weight easily and they also lose weight very easily. This is where I feel, I have some patients who do their regular annual panchakarma at very good places, but then they only maintain it for 2 months afterwards. They have come back to England, and then they're really waiting to get back to their panchakarma plays after a year because they put on weight very easily, or even their biomarkers change. So what can I do there? There I would have to introduce Langhana or intermittent fasting. And then the kapha metabolic type, they can skip meals easily and be alright, which actually is very good because it helps for us to do intermittent fasting. Yeah, we know this, like they gain fat below the waist region or gain fat evenly and finds it difficult to lose weight. And some of the key things that we would want to look at is all those aggravating factors from a classical perspective is indigestion, ajirna. So like any kind of problems with digestive functions, you know, is all those aggravating factors, all the three doshas. Complex foods, you know, sankirna is a term that's used in classics. Sankirna is something which is very complex. For instance, if you were there in the debate this morning about honey, one of the qualities of honey is because it's collected from so many different sources, has different media, different gunas, it becomes sankirna, very complex. But if you think about today, most of our foods are sankirna because our recipes are very sankirna. Even when we use Ayurvedic principles, the way we combine it is not traditional. We make it up in our mind, you know, like master chefs. And then it looks good, tastes good, but actually we don't understand the energetics of it. And processed foods are all sankirna because, you know, the pre-made food or half processed food, they're all sankirna, and they obviously would be aggravating all doshas, and non-nutritionist vegetables and excessive consumption of root vegetables. This is interesting. In Ayurveda, it is said that you can't have too many root vegetables. So think of potatoes, for instance, and non-fresh meat, non-seasonal food, and visha. So if you can compare all of that, poison is in the same list as the rest of the things when it comes to what aggravates all the doshas. And over-medication, this is interesting. Like if somebody has undergone too many shodhanas, that also aggravates all the three doshas. And if you compare that with over-medication, most of the patients who come to me already come to me with 4 or 5 medications already. Or they would be required to take their medications for the rest of their life because they had cancer treatment, or they're on, you know, they have Hashimoto's, they have to be on thyroid, or they're on metformin or antihypertensive. So if you think of these, why I would say a lot of us would be fit candidates for Langhana is because of these things. Because there are so many factors that are indications for Langhana. And Abhishandi foods. You know, if you want to translate Abhishandi foods in the modern context, I would say the ones which contains high fructose, sucrose, and bleached flours, white rice, white pasta, white bread, hydrogenated oils, you know, where the food is fried repeatedly, where the oil is heated more than its smoking point, which is quite common if you like French fries, and sodium nitrate containing foods, you know, to keep the meat pink and fresh. It's obviously used, and also nitrosamine containing foods like pickled foods, smoked foods, beer, cheese. So these all would be sankirna and would contribute towards increasing all the three doshas. And gluten-containing food can be armor-forming. Certain dairy foods, you know, like if it's not an A2 milk, if it's A1 milk, then it could be. And red meat and poultry, because they have more omega-6 which are pro-inflammatory, then omega-3s which are anti-inflammatory, and nightshades, you know, like nightshades you could literally think are armor forming and vata forming as well in the long run, because traditional Ayurvedic practitioners would always say, do not actually eat potatoes. I remember all traditional Ayurvedic healers would tell Indians that, okay, stop eating potatoes if you have joint pains. So now that makes sense because it's one of the nightshades. And refined sugars are also armor forming. So mainly, we have very few minutes left, but mainly what is important is that we focus so much, you know, when your fish is dying in your aquarium, do you feed better food or do you change the water? The first thing that you will do is to change the water. So it's important that we use Langhana as our first measure before thinking of giving a lot of herbs. a lot of Shamana Aushadas. When you do Langhana, because you have achieved Dipana Pachana, your Shamana is going to be more effective. Otherwise, you might be contributing to the dosha aggravation. So what classics say is, in Alpa Bala Vyadi, if there are mild diseases, and if the person is slightly overweight, or if they have low strength, or if they can't undergo Panchakarma, then Langhana would be a good thing to do. And as I said, Ekadashi, 11th day of the lunar cycle. I particularly have found this, just on the sideline, to be very effective if you are treating or if you are helping couples to conceive. Like to do intermittent fasting on Ekadashi, I have found in the last 5 years to be tremendously helpful in changing their chances of actually conceiving. And then, with this I'll also skip through. The main thing that happens when we are doing Langhana is it's not starvation, because your body is still using ketones. It's just that it's not using glucose for converting energy, but it's using ketone, which then hits the stored reserves of fat. And I must say that a stored fat, or fat that is not disrupted, is the one which becomes a rubbish bag of all toxins, for instance heavy metals. So it is important to mobilize ketosis, or to use ketones as the energy source. And the way I do this is, first let me go to the method and then let me come back to the process. Is if you start fasting, have your dinner and then you fast until tomorrow evening, like 5 to 7 p.m. one day to the same time next day, and then exercise on a fasted stomach. And again, when I say exercise, to your Ardha Bala, and I'll share with you finally, there are many exercises that you can do that is actually not going to push you beyond your Ardha Bala. Exercise at the end of the day or on a snack, and you will burn glycogen. I mean, this is what research shows, is that if you exercise in the afternoon would be much better. For me, doing yoga in the morning and exercising in the afternoon always helps me sleep better and also to function better. So let me go back to how what happens is, on the first day the blood sugar level drops, and on the second fast day the blood sugar is maintained from the glycogen breakdown, and by about 48 hours ketosis starts. This is when I start to think that actually proper Langhana has happened. Do you have to do 48 hours? No. With a lot of my patients, they can manage 12 hours. They just do overnight, or 16 hours. Some are able to do 26, some go up to 36. But if they maintain that regularity, say once in 15 days, or once in a month, or on Ekadashi, or they can do that on a weekly basis, I can clearly see that both clinically, their complexion improves, their acne improves, and through blood tests, the biomarkers also improve. When it comes to finally the exercise, Vyayama, Atapa, and Martha Sevana, like in Ashtanga Hridaya, it says that in Madhyama Bala Vyadis, in Avara Bala Vyadis, and the patient is Balavan, is physically strong, then that you can use Vyayama as one of the interventions. And often, finally, when it comes to exercise, our concern is, are we doing it non-Ayurvedically because we can over-exercise? There are two things that I have found practically very helpful. One is high-intensity interval training, which is, where you warm up for about 30 seconds and then you sprint for about 20 to 30 seconds and then you recover for 90 seconds. And generally what I do is that if you are running outside, sprint as fast as you can for about 30 seconds, take about 60 to 90 seconds slow walk, and again sprint. And if you do that about 8 times, and then you repeat that twice or thrice weekly, you can see that it can be a very good thing. And the other thing that I also like to say is super slow weightlifting. This is a very interesting thing. Even if you are a bodybuilder, you don't need to actually take 5 or 10 kgs or 20 kgs. Just take 2 kgs And what you do is you slowly, flex and extend the muscle to the extent that you don't even notice your body, your muscles moving. And that kind of creating tension with very light weight is actually not going to push you beyond your 50% Bada. In other terms, actually, it is going to make you stronger. And this is something that people can do. One is high intensity interval training, and this super slow weightlifting. And in fact, I'd like to finally share that when you do this super slow weight training, research has shown that there is doing one set of this, or even one set of high intensity interval training, is equivalent to exercising for 45 minutes. The main problem that we today have, finally I'd like to conclude by saying actually being fit is not necessarily going to guarantee health. And recently we had a British master chef who was in the finals of master chef, a very healthy person, very fit person, and he was vegan as well. Then he ran marathon, and he ran 3 marathons successfully. On the 4th marathon in April in London, when it was the hottest day, after 22 miles, he just dropped dead. He was only 27 years old. So fitness is not necessarily going to guarantee health. But when you really think about the Ayurvedic concept, that it is how to train your body to be able to give you enough bala or strength to maintain health. And I found this HIIT or HIIT and then slow weightlifting with very light weights extremely helpful, because you are not pushing your adrenals all the time. With all other exercises, you are actually increasing your vata, and you are disturbing your tissues because you are setting degeneration because of constant push of adrenaline. Whereas with these, you are actually not pushing your adrenaline, you are actually allowing your adrenals to calm down and to have that sinusoidal curve. So, thank you very much, and I hope that you would consider giving Dvividhopakrama or Langhana or Apatarpana as one of your major Chikitsa Upakrama when it comes to your clinic, especially if you are practicing in a place like my clinic in London, where we don't have the huge resources to be able to give them complete Shodhana, or maybe my patients are not yet ready for a complete Shodhana. And just considering Sushruta's indication that some people would need everyday Langhana, that these could be some of the measures that we could be using. Yeah? Thank you.